Okay, I think we're ready to go. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Appreciate you're busy, so hopefully today you will gain some interesting ideas and insight from the time with us. But just before we start, I wanted to do a quick introduction. For those that don't know me, I'm Andy Patrick from Fournet. I lead our Connecting Wales service and practice within the business, and I work closely with Tony Curlis from Bailey Glamorgan, along with other founder members of the board. Today, I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Caroline Thomas, Adam Clough, and Sandeep Patel. They form part of our consulting team within the Fournet business. Between them, I've got decades of experience helping organisations like yourselves improve customer experience and process efficiency. So a bit of a background on Fournet. So who are Fournet? Well, we are a digital transformation specialist, and we provide cloud and managed services that range from unified communications, contact center, and customer experience, which we'll be talking about today, through to secure networking and cyber security. We help customers transform their businesses, and that helps then change and empower employees and delight customers, and also prepares them for the future. So on to Connecting Wales, which I know this is hosted around that sort of around the framework for Connecting Wales, aimed at the Welsh public sector. Connecting Wales is a Welsh government-backed framework. It is actually a subset of Fournet's portfolio, which is very broad, and it allows public sector bodies in Wales to easily procure fit-for-purpose communications and collaboration services and customer experience services in a simple and cost-effective way. And that ultimately should help improve citizen and employee satisfaction through the use of those tools, intuitive applications that enable communication channels of choice and also allow quick access for agents to information. And that's amongst many other benefits of those services. And I will be happy to talk about that a little bit later, but I'm keen to get handed over to my colleagues, so we get into the really interesting stuff for today's session. But yeah, do take a moment, please, to have a look at the connectingwales.com webpage for more information, or by all means get in touch with myself or Mr. Curlis to learn more about that. So on to today. We will be talking about automation of services and processes and how such projects are now very much high up on everyone's agenda in almost every sector. We're aware, as I'm sure you are, that the challenges within the Welsh public sector and other local authorities across the UK, the challenges faced are still very similar to what they have been over recent years around budget cuts, restrictions, an increase in costs, demands around compliance, data security, and that's just naming a few of those areas that we can see now on screen. And there's a lot of areas that, again, are posing challenges. So doing more with less and doing that securely and automating services where you can to save money without compromising service, I think has never been more important than it is now. So we will be asking the question, when should you automate? When's the right time to do it, and what services to automate? We'll talk around some of the challenges that automation projects can bring, but also the returns that they can offer. We'll discuss getting the buy-in from the wider organisation, the wider business, to support that business case, to help ultimately arrive at the right sort of projects that you need to focus on. And we do want today's talk to be interactive as possible. So please do ask questions by using the chat icon at the corner of the screen, which hopefully you can all see there now. And so yeah, so do feel free to ask those as we go, and we'll make sure that they get answered as part of that conversation. But just before I hand over to my colleagues, I just wanted to walk through, well, they're going to walk through Fournet's tried and tested methodology for successful projects. And we're going to touch on some of the real life case studies and some projects that we've been involved in ourselves. But I'd like to kick off that interactivity with a brief poll, which again should be now appearing on the screen. And basically, we'd just like to ask the question and ask people to take a guess. Bear with me 1 second if I just find this information. So who'd like to take a guess at just how many automation projects actually fail? And I think you'll find that the answer to that, when we've actually got some responses to the poll.
They're coming in. It's like Eurovision, is this, Andy?
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Coming in thick and fast. 3 seconds remaining. There we go. Can we see the results?
Over to Bill.
So interestingly, we've got a few optimists among. That's good to see. Unfortunately, quite a lot of people probably understand what has gone before. So the realization is that between 69 and 85% of all digital transformations fail. Sorry for starting with that slightly depressing note on a call which is meant to be about automation and how that works.
Yeah, so apologies. Yeah, I'm waiting for the poll to appear. It doesn't appear to be coming onto my screen, so I'm sitting here staring at that and realise that I've not got the results, but they're very in front of us on the slide. So thanks, Caroline, because it is at this point now. I would like to hand over to Caroline and the rest of the team to talk about, I guess, a little bit about why that is the case and what the challenges are that lead to such kind of disappointing stats, really. So over to you, Caroline.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. So yeah, good morning, everybody. This is an interesting piece of research done by a number, as you can see, of different agencies gathered over the last sort of 3 years. What we find really interesting about this is the fact that ultimately, everybody talks about digital transformation, everybody wants automation, everybody wants innovation, chat, AI, you know, they want all the generative stuff that happens out there. But unfortunately, as polled by these different companies across the UK, there are several reasons why these sorts of projects fail. And of course, we're talking about multi-million, sometimes billion even pound projects with massive companies. And if we look at some of the key reasons why they fail, you know, reasons like we didn't actually understand the root cause of our problems. We didn't really understand what the benefits were going to be to the business. So we just saw something shiny, took the promise, and there it was. Also talking about the technology that perhaps you think you want, but you don't actually need. We're going to touch a bit on that. We've got a case study with one of our councils later that we're going to talk about there. But I think interestingly, some of the bits that we're really keen on that really helps solidify business cases and really helps us understand what's going on there is around the data. So a lot of businesses, because, and I'm sure you guys may be the same, they have legacy systems, which mean you have data in different places, in different formats, probably with secured areas, which means somebody can't look at somebody else's. And it's then really, really difficult to bring together that story, to be able to use that data to help you understand the problems and to also help you work on how you can go about improving those and what the benefits would be to your business. We, as a rule, like to check into all of these different elements. One of the interesting points, which only one of the surveys was asking around, was about the leadership side of things. Now, clearly, you know, that's something that's defined by a business. But again, we find very much that, you know, the challenges that are out there are generally just because of a lack of ability to be able to give, you know, a secure business case, to be able to really explain what the challenges are for the citizens, the customers, the agents, the people in the business, the various different departments of the C-suite. So we will touch back on that later on as we go through the sessions. So a bit about us. There's myself, my friend and colleague Adam, and Sandeep, who are also on the call this morning. Within our team, there's a number of other people, but I think Andy was very polite saying decades. I think now we're up to about 130 years contact centre experience between us. Yeah, we're only 21, I know that. But we have a vast amount of experience working in large organisations, working across many different sectors, you know, talking thousands and thousands of agents at a time, right down to really niche businesses where there might be 20 to 30 different agents. One thing that brought us all together was this passion of understanding what it is that you are actually trying to solve, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and being able to back that up by data. So if we think back to the challenges that were on the previous slide, very much what we like to make sure is those have all been mitigated against, because there's nothing worse than getting overexcited about transformation, heading straight to what we have as point 5 in our approach, and then ultimately finding out that, you know, it might not be something that solves a problem that exists, and it ends up costing the business more in the long run. So we now at Fournet are loving being here, because we have the opportunity to work with councils like yourselves, local authorities, blue light, housing associations, government, and of course we get to work with Andy, so you know what more of a treat could there be? But we still bring with us the approach that we used to take across all of the other businesses. We've got some case studies that we're going to talk about later on. And please, as Andy said, use the chat if there's anything you want to comment on, if there's anything that, you know, you guys agree with, anything that you know, maybe don't, you know, want to challenge how it's different in your organisation. So this is our 5-stage approach. Adam and Sandy are going to talk about the clever stuff behind it. Shortly, they're going to explain some real business cases behind that. But in simple terms, we start at the very beginning. I won't do Sound of Music, I won't sing, don't worry everybody. But we look to analyse and assess. So this is either looking at the data, this is coming on site, this is spending time with agents. We've done that, I know, with some of you guys on the call today. Really getting to understand what happens within your business, getting to understand the challenges that are really being faced. That is a really big part of what we do, because once we've got all that data, those observations, the feedback, the understanding about your business, where it's headed, you know, what your challenges are specifically, we're then in a position where we can work with you, move on. We look to design and develop solutions. So this is still not talking tech, talking about your current operating procedures and models. We then look to optimize those. So again, you know, with what you've got, how can we help make you more efficient? Frustratingly, some of this may be things that you've been saying, please, we'd like to do this for years. And then a fresh voice comes in and somebody listens. So the great is that it then turns out for the better. Just a bit frustrating for you guys. We then move on though, you know, we look at enhancing. So how do we then use that with the right technologies? And then finally, it's time for the transformation. And in some cases, it might be there is nothing left to transform, because by doing all of these other things, putting in small pieces of technology to help the processors, we're in a really, really good place. So I'm going to hand over to Adam and Sandeep. They're going to talk to us about one of the local authorities and housing associations that we worked with. And just to start the story, interestingly, if we look back to the previous slide where we were talking about the technology that you want but you don't need, this client came to us and said, what we'd really like is a queue buster tool, which in summary is a piece of technology. It would have cost them just short, I think, of £100,000. And they wanted it because they couldn't keep on top of the calls they were getting. They wanted it to be able to respond to their customers. So they came to us and we, as a team, went, hang on a minute, how about you let us come in, have a bit of a look, and let's see what the problem really is. So, Adam, Sandeep, over to you.
Thank you.
To talk about the clever stuff.
You say clever. Morning, everyone. So my name's Adam. Just kind of give Andy gave a bit of an intro. So my background is workforce planning and optimization. Then we've got Sandeep, whose background's all about data and everything else. So the way that we kind of approach or try to approach each of these sort of projects is, as Caroline said, to really get under the skin of understanding what the drivers are behind the problem that's trying to be solved. So as Caroline said, a lot of people will go through a process of seeing the outcome symptom and then trying to fix that. So in the case of sort of the previous sort of council client that we were working with, they were abandoning calls, really high average speed of answer, really high abandon rate, sort of circa 50% abandon rate. I think average speed of answer was up over 800 seconds, and everything else. So they were kind of in that world of actually, well, they thought they needed a queue buster to deal with the fact that calls were queuing all the time, which on the face of it is a good logical path to take. You think I've got lots of queuing, and I've got customers and everything else that can't get through. Therefore, put a queue buster in, the customer experience is better because they don't have to sit and wait. It'll automate the callback and all the sorts of bits and pieces and hold the place in the queue. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to just make sure that that tech was right for what they actually needed to do, and that was the right piece of kit to buy, because the things with queue busters is if you have capacity, they will utilize that capacity. If you don't have capacity, they won't generate any more capacity, and that was the issue that we found. So the first thing that kind of we did is we went in and sort of had a look through, sort of gathered all the data, did so we do an on-site visit first, effectively, go have a look at stuff, find out how everything's put together, what different service lines, how many agents have you got in each service line, what the different skills are across those service lines, is there any multi-skilling, what are your targets, what even down to what your shrinkage and everything else, and how much holiday does everybody get, what's your sickness run rate, all. So literally getting that full picture of what's currently happening within that environment from them. And then obviously Sandeep comes in from a data perspective, which I'll let him talk about in a minute, of the approach that we took, sort of in this example, to kind of work together with them to get the data together. So, one of the things that we do find is sort of everybody kind of knows what should happen. But in some environments, as Caroline was saying, with lots of legacy systems and disparate bits of data and everything else, finding out what is actually happening is a bit of a challenge. So what I'll do is I'll just hand over quickly to Sandy and let him kind of talk you through kind of how we bridge that gap. Once we know how it should be set up, how do we get that feel for what's actually going on?
Cheers, Adam. So data, usually probably the most painful part for most businesses. Collect loads of it. It gets warehoused over here and over there. You don't really know where it is, and pulling it all together and getting access to all of it and connecting it all is probably the most challenging bit of, well, I believe it is, because it's the bit I do, of our process. So for this North East Council, basically it's many calls working through how they currently, what system they have, how they access the data, what they can extract, what they can share with me, and then I will go away, beaver away in the background, and then piece it all together. And the main part of the data side of things under the analyze and assess is to understand maybe not the root cause at this stage. We try and get as far down as we can, but it guides everything we do. So understanding where issues are, even if we don't find the root cause of the issue, when we go on site, it allows our service designers, Caroline, Lee, and Ollie, to focus in on particular areas, provide a little bit of, well, they'll spend a little bit of extra time just to figure out what the root cause of the problems could be. So for your homes, sorry, for the North East Council, it was a good process, actually. When we went in and analysed everything, we normally think of automation and things like that as automating the agent processes and trying to make everyone else's life easier. But the first thing we found was their reporting and MI team, the way they were currently operating, wasn't optimized at all. So as much as we want to improve agent and customer behaviors and experiences, the first thing we actually did was support the MI function by automating their job, or most of it, so they could focus on actually providing more value to the business.
And I think it's fair to say as well, Sandeep, isn't it? We part of the way that we work together. So you love your numbers, love your spreadsheets. I almost want to say show of hands, anyone on the call who's a bit of a data geek and loves that side of things. We very much bring together the data, you know, those that love a good spreadsheet, with, like you mentioned, those of us within the service design side, where we're wanting to get to understand, you know, by sitting with agents, by listening to the calls, by watching, you know, how they use the various different systems, by also being able to listen to the customer conversations, you know, customer frustrations. It helps us put that context behind the analysis that Sandeep does. So you might come to us, you know, and say, this is a bit strange. This happens at, you know, 10 o'clock every morning. What's going on there then? And we're sitting on site, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, something might happen, you know, like the sandwich man might arrive. We've seen this in places, which suddenly then changes everyone's behaviours, and the, you know, the length of the calls and what have you. So it's interesting to put the context behind it, but also to make sure that, you know, your teams have a voice. I always say the most important people, no disrespect to any of us on this call, in a contact centre are the agents. You know, they're the ones who day in, day out are speaking with the customers, with the citizens. And it's them who ultimately, you know, they really know and understand the challenges. What we need to make sure is that the data is there to back it up. You know, that perhaps we've not had, I don't know, high winds that have led to a number of horrendous calls coming through, you know, lots of challenges there. Let's actually look at the data and see what that's, you know, what that's telling us. So it's bringing together, you know, the numbers, the data, and then also almost the hearts and minds, as we like to call it, you know, the voice of the customer and the voice of your agents.
I think before the consultancy team was brought about within Fournet, I don't think I really did appreciate the I guess the value of that process and looking at the data in that way. You know, I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and there's a lot of, you know, we think something's going on, and we you know, we have a suspicion that this is the reason why X is happening. But I guess going through the process that we have done as a team with other customers over the last couple of years, it has been quite an eye-opener for me, especially when, and we're going to get to it in a little while, but you start to see how you then take that data and present it in a way that's digestible, I suppose, is a fair way to sort of describe it, is easy to sort of understand, and you can then put your finger on it and go, right, okay, that's the use case. And I'm just probably stealing someone's thunder there, but, you know, that's the way we sort of, you know, focus our energy and prioritize. So, but yeah, the data and the work that Sandeep's done with some of the clients that I've worked with over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, as you know, the output is fascinating. And it's, yeah, who'd have thought it? I'd like data in such a way, but it has. I think it's the way Sandeep does it. It must be something to do with the way he does it. I don't know.
Definitely all me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key. You know, the bit that people kind of and people appreciate, but they can't always get to it, is data underpins everything, really, and especially what we do. So, you know, what we tend to do is, obviously we do this process of where we want to fully understand the business, like Caroline said, all the drivers from an agent perspective, from a customer perspective, all the data that we can get, and we generally work on the basis that, you know, we have kind of a checklist of things that we need to be able to see to get the full picture. And we, you know, we kind of go down the route in when we're kind of deployed into clients of, if they haven't got it, we'll build it. As long as the underlying raw data is available, we'll plug those gaps and sort of fill that knowledge of what's happening in the contact center. Because a key bit to sort of making sure that you get the best value out of your transformation projects is to make sure that you fully understand where you're starting from. This is the bit that a lot of people will jump straight to box number 5, and they'll just go, right, put this in and it's going to do X, and they'll believe the sales speak, because obviously, you know, the companies that provide this tech a lot of the time will have very specific use cases, and there will be very specific benefits attached to them. but actually, when you actually throw that into an environment that is potentially not running as efficiently as it could do, that then skews the whole outcomes base of that. And that's why we kind of, we kind of work on this basis that one of the reasons why we've got this 5-step process. So we've got analyze and assess and design and develop over the side, which is about understanding the business, and then from the data and the conversations, then working out the best solution, the optimized solution to deliver the business outcomes and, mitigate the business challenges as much as possible in the contact center, without having to deploy anything. So getting it fit for purpose to start. At all stages, we measure everything as it goes all the way through, so we build that baseline, and we measure all the changes that we potentially propose and everything else as you go through to make sure that we are, delivering tangible benefit for each intervention. And this is before we get to the transform bit, so the key bit for us is, we work on this. So as you can see on screen, is this kind of, you've got an uncertainty of outcome and a time to implement sort of dimensions within most transformation projects. Transforming the business and just jumping straight to sort of putting a transformation project in always takes a long time to do. That's the longest time to implement, because you've got to go through business cases, procurement, deployment, all those sorts of bits and pieces. But it also has generally the greatest uncertainty of outcome, because it's something new and something that you've usually not used before, and therefore don't really have a full understanding of what it's going to do to your business. So mapping that out is actually quite difficult. So what we like to do is we like to go through this process first, of optimizing currently what you've got. Like Caroline said, now this is effectively what we do here is we look at what the business outcome requirements are, what service levels you want to achieve. So, how many, if you've got core capacities you need to hit and all those sorts of bits and pieces. And it's not always about fixing everything at Optimize, because you might not be able to fix it. You might need tech at some point, but it's about making sure that the contact center is running as efficiently as possible and, is doing the best it can. It is productive, and, it has the greatest capacity for work that it can within the constraints of the current environment. So, for instance, when we were doing the North East Council, what we did was when we actually looked at how their contact center was constructed, they had a big everybody could do a little bit of everything from a skills perspective. They have 30 service lines that were coming in. Of those, however, there were really sort of 3 pots. But they generally just ran everything on a, they've got X amount of people can do this skill and X amount of people can do that skill, and nothing was really thought of even though they'd aligned their systems within sort of pots of people, they never really ran it in pots of people. So what we kind of suggested was at that point is actually, if we change the way that the agents are deployed, then you will generate a faster speed of answer and a more efficient contact center, because a third of their volume was switchboard calls, which were sort of sub 1 minute. But because they were trying to intersperse those calls with, for instance, there are tenants and things ringing about repairs that could, those calls could take 20 minutes. You kind of generating a queue for a minute call when you're answering a 20-minute call because you've not organized in the right way. So what we decided to do was actually reorganize how they prioritize their calls. And what that did initially was actually we reduced their average speed of answer straight away from sort of 800 seconds down to sort of 400. So it's cut it in half straight away. And then obviously as we built on the optimization, to realign people's skills and prioritize calls, we did things like, so we built some reports, Sandy built some reporting to report on what we call gap, which is effectively the gap between what we have planned for somebody to do and what they're actually doing. And it generally highlights gaps in, it's a gap in data. So it's a, you know, if somebody was not scheduled for a meeting within the plan, but they'd been taken off for a meeting, we would highlight that and say, well, actually, they've, you know, if they were off for an hour, we'd highlight that they effectively went missing for an hour, even though, you know, the business knew where they were doing something they should be doing, but it kind of highlights that we'd not factored that into the plan, and therefore, you know, from a real-time perspective, you were reacting to a plan that wasn't true. So all that visibility and everything else kind of you know, is part of that optimize process. It's getting everything to run efficiently in there. And
I think it's about helping the teams, isn't it, Adam? Because, you know, if we think about, this isn't about us coming in and doing this to somebody. This was very much working with them, wasn't it? And, you know, we all know what it's like. Your head down, dealing with everything that you're dealing with in the day to day, with the challenges that, you know, we've spoken about previously, that you're all dealing with. And actually, this is about, it's about that working together, isn't it, to help understand, right, how better can we use this in order to then be able to do that, but making sure that it fits with, you know, the business that everybody's, you know, being bought into.
Yeah, and it is really, you know, it's, you know, people have come to us to kind of support with this, because if you are neck deep in the day-to-day running, and, you know, you almost you become desensitized to how things could be. You kind of get concentrating on how things are and trying to firefight and this and that, and you can't, you know, it's the old, you can't see the wood for the trees bit, isn't it? So the bit where what we help do is kind of lift that and take a step back and go, actually, forget what you've got. What is the optimum way of constructing everything, and what is a efficient way of getting from where you are to where you'd ideally want to be?
Yeah.
And that's just in the construct of, you know, it's like, say, prioritizing calls. It's how you split your staff across different service lines. It's what shifts you've got, all those sorts of bits, how you deploy your shrinkages. All those bits kind of fit into that optimized bucket.
Yeah.
And that's all about, as we say, taking your current operating model and helping you then move that forward to make it as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
Before you had any tech.
Yeah. And I think if we use this as an example, and we do have other examples and other clients that we've worked with, we just feel that this is really relevant, you know, with the fact that it's a very recent piece of work that we're doing, and with all of the challenges that are happening, and then, you know, let's throw in a general election just for giggles, to also add to the complexity. But if we think about this example, these guys sell each other short, you know, quite a lot of the time. If I throw in some numbers, so if we think back to, we want a piece of tech, this is what we think we want. We said, well, let's come in and have a look. What we did work out was that based on what they had they have carried on running as they were running, they'd have needed to invest just over $1 million just in people to be able to actually answer the calls that they needed to answer. And then on top of that, there would have been £100,000 worth of tech that actually wouldn't have solved the problem and would have compounded it. So I think it's important for us to talk those kind of numbers, isn't it? You know, when we're talking about, you know, this is taxpayers' money. You know, this is public money, and it's vitally important how we go on and do that.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you know, it's like we said, sort of just optimizing the contacts and either getting visibility, changing the way that the work was organized, and all those little bits and pieces. It's like you say, it was about doing more with what you've got. Now, the size of that contact center is about 60 FTE across all the services. That's front office, back office, everything. And as you say, Caroline, to get to the outcomes that they've managed to get to the way they used to run it, they would have needed 87 FTE to deliver the same benefit. So it's kind of a 27 FTE of what we call cost avoidance, because we've managed to get their performance, or, well, I say we've helped them get their performance, because it's all, as you say, it's about coaching and just providing insight and different ways of looking at things. We've got their performance to a point now where they're achieving service. I think the last look that we had was they've got a target average speed of answer of 170 seconds. I think they're running about 90 to 100 seconds over the last couple of weeks. With the same amount of people, they've not put any more people in. They're answering more calls now than they've ever answered. So it's not about, call volume's not dropped. They're doing more with the same amount of people. Sickness and absence has dropped in that contact centre. They were at 8%, they're now at 4%. So another key thing to remember is that when you optimise the contact centre, it's not about just making agents work harder, because that just creates other problems. They go off sick or they leave and everything else. It's about making the whole environment run optimally, which includes all those things like, not pushing sickness absence up, not pushing attrition, because they are all huge costs to a business. So it has to be that balanced approach.
Yeah.
And then obviously once we got to that, go on, Sandy, sorry.
I was going to say, doing this for that council has now, optimising their current state has now allowed them to look at things like a new IVR system instead of whatever they're using at the moment, where everything falls out and it just ends up at the contact centre switchboard. It's allowed them to look at auto summary to automate the notes. It's allowed them to actually implement new technology, which is going to deliver a true benefit, like halving the after call work time, but they're actually going to see the benefit of it.
I think
it's not going to get masked by loop. It's not going to get lost somewhere else because they didn't know what the optimum state was. They know this is where we're starting from, and this is the benefit we should be seeing, and that's how.
And I think that starting with just that one use case, like you say, Sandeep, it's actually opened the door, because those benefits can be realised and can go into that business case. And I know we're going to talk about business case a little bit along the way, but that sort of self-funding roadmap, you could argue. So understanding what your technology roadmap, and I know we're not talking about technology, but we kind of are. Yeah. Understanding what that might look like, that transformation roadmap, I should say, might look like, which may need some investment. Being able to apply technology in such a way that, when you do the number crunching, the data analytics stuff, that you've given yourself a proven kind of use case. You're giving yourself a real return on investment model that you can have some faith in. And the case study we keep talking about, we under-egged it ultimately, didn't we, in the first instance? I believe when we first ran the numbers, we said we should be able to get a saving of X. Actually, when things were applied, it kind of blew it out of the water. But that's not always going to be the case for everybody. And that's another point I wanted to mention, that we talk about these things. Not everybody's got all the kind of, I'm not going to say problems, but all the, maybe those inefficiencies, but there quite often is something in there. And I think understanding the data, and that's, we keep talking about data, but understanding the data and being able to read that data, I think that's it. There's lots of it around there. Being able to read it in such a way and present it in such a way that then builds that business case, that gives everybody the confidence that, look, guys, if we do this, it's going to work, and it's the right thing for us to do. It's, we put it high up on the priorities list, and by doing it, actually, that's going to save X pounds. We can put that money, or we can put those resources into doing the next thing, and that next thing might save the next chunk of money or the next chunk of time and effort, and so on. So I think, I think it's key. That starting point is key. I think ultimately we keep coming back to it, but it is key. But it opens the door to much more and assist those business cases along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I'll move on to because again, this sort of talks to Adam what you've been talking through, doesn't it? There, with regards to how we approach and how we look at things. Again, this is how we do it. It's not to say it's right, wrong, or indifferent. The figures speak for themselves with some of the approaches in some of the places. And as Andy says, we do different things with different clients for different reasons, depending on what the root causes are. I don't know, guys, do you want to chip in on
I'll
here as well?
I'll try and briefly cover it. One of the things we look at is what types of contact your contact center receives, and then are those value add for the customer and the business? Are they value add for the customer but not the business? And are they an irritant, or are they a waste of time for the business and the customer? So we take all of your contacts, give them a score, and put them into one of these 4 areas. So if it's irritating for the customer and irritating for the business, you want to eliminate them. If it's irritating for the customer and it's a value for the business, or the other way around, you want to assist, and then you want to automate some, and you want to also deflect the others. So with this, I won't go into too much detail, but I think one of Andy's first engagements with our team was for a white goods manufacturer up north, and they wanted to automate basically all of the contact into the contact center. But when we looked at how the business works and understood the business, the key thing, they could automate 90-odd% of their contacted. Everything's available on the website. They've got loads of resources which were available to the customer through like tech support channels and whatever else. But it wasn't the right thing for them, because if they automated all their contact, they were going to lose out on loads of revenue, because people contacting them, some of those contacts were valuable and they could generate extra revenue from them. So breaking it down into this sort of visual, or into this sort of analysis, it's key basically for me. And it's nice and easy because I get to organise the data, ship it over the fence, and then the service designers score everything.
I think that's the bit as well, that because I've seen this a number of times now, and I think this is almost it starts to become your strategy, your roadmap, your kind of transformation, certainly a guideline around it, because again, as we say, there's some things we say eliminate. It's not going to be the same for absolutely everybody, and some things there'll be a reason why it can't be entirely eliminated. But what it will do is it will highlight the things to focus on, and the things that and then that scoring process, which is kind of interesting. The detail that goes into that as well, just literally taking those steps and putting a score of, is it good for us? Is it good for the customer? I think is a really a proper sensible way to approach this, to bring those things forward, because again, some things are going to be really irritating to customers, but the organization, the business, for whatever reason, it has to be that way. So there's not much that we can kind of do about that, but that's when you then start thinking about them in a different way. Well, what can we do to enhance that then? What can we do to make that either better for us or better for them? But this visual, I think, is for me is a really great kind of starting point to bring some of those points home, and then take that then onwards into the transformation roadmap.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think on top of that, of course, there's the agents as well, isn't there? We talked about Sandeep helping automate some data analysis. You then have people who can actually feel like they're adding value in their day instead of just putting something in a spreadsheet. You think about the agents, when you get to the point where you put in a technology generally to assist them, so you've got rid of the mundane sorts of questions that they don't like answering, the day-to-day. They actually want to help your vulnerable customers. They want to help those, who have got a fence that's blown down and the dog's likely to run off, and all of that. They want the time and the challenge to do that. But then we're in a position to say, right, now we know what's left. Let's have a look at how we can transform that, with automation, with digital approaches. So I think that probably covers a lot of what we've talked about today. I'm going to come back to this slide again where we spoke at the beginning. Thank you everyone for being patient and sitting and listening in. I guess, from our perspective now, it's very much with us. As I say, we make sure we nod to all of these different elements on here. We make sure that this, it's been a partnership. very much so. And you know, we've had the pleasure of working with some truly lovely guys like Andy, but also clients and their agents too. But if we do just think about this, you know, again, talking about the data, talking about the things we've done, if we think about back to the original example of, can you give me a queue buster because I can't answer all my calls and the customers, you know, are getting frustrated having to wait forever. We could have ended that conversation there and then and gone, yes, thank you very much. We'll take your orders, write the check, off we go. What we've actually done for that business, you know, as Adam said, is we've helped them save money. We've helped them find money that they can then invest in other technologies. So we're talking about real-time voice analytics. We're talking about auto summaries of calls at the end of it. We're working with other clients where, as Sandeep said, you know, automating everything would not have been the right thing for their business. So looking at how we actually do that so that they still have the efficiency and the automation, but also have the revenue. But ultimately, from us saying, actually, no, as a technology vendor, we do not want to sell you tech, which still, when we say that out loud, I'm surprised we've also got a job, but thankful we do. That's, you know, that's led us very much to be where we are today. And I think ultimately it is this, let's work through the different stages, let's mitigate all of these horrors here. You know, let's not do anything to you and your agents, throw a new piece of tech in that's just going to make life more complicated, more frustrating, never mind the customers on the end of it. But ultimately, how do we stop those failures? And hopefully, you know, we can have another call in 12 months' time. We can ask you guys these similar questions. And, you know, my hope would be that none of you would be calling out, you know, these kind of challenges. Hopefully it would be other things like, you know, as we say, elections getting in the way and the great British weather and all of those things, and Welsh weather, which we won't talk about. Although our visit to Anglesey, what's it like there today, Andy?
It is rather sunny today, or at least it was the last time I looked out the window, yeah.
I was going to say it was positively tropical when we were there earlier in the year. So, yeah, I'd definitely much rather be down there with you today. So I think just we'll move on to some final thoughts then. And Sandeep, Adam, I don't know if you've got anything else to add before we just hand over to Andy.
No, I think the key bit, you know, like we kind of keep going back to is a lot of the time tech will help. You know, everybody wants to get into the things of, you know, we want tech, which is good because it will help, you know, generative AI, RPA, conversational AI, analytics, all those sorts of bits and pieces, real-time speech. They will help a business to enhance its offerings. But the bit that kind of we like to help with is, one, as you say, tangible business benefits off the back of it, because you're starting from an optimized position and you know exactly, I changed the handle time, I know exactly what it's going to do. You know, I changed how many calls are coming in, I know exactly what my benefit is. But the other bit is as well is, like you said, Caroline, it's the right tech. Because sometimes businesses will have an idea and somebody will see something or, you know, go to a sales pitch from a vendor and go, oh, I like that, I want one of them. And then when you look at it, you go, yeah, actually, no, you don't, you want one of these. And this is why you want one of these. And that's kind of, you know, that's also a thing that we like to sort of aid customers with, is finding the right tech to solve the issue.
Yeah.
Not just any tech that looks nice and shiny.
Indeed, and I think to slightly counter that, obviously there's a starting point, Adam, isn't there really? And, and that's quite, you know, a lot of the clients that we've seen and worked with over the last few years are coming from quite a legacy background, which doesn't really interact, you know, no interoperability with anything in the kind of modern world, but making that first step, which, you know, to digital, shall we say, which then opens the door to then adding in these other services that you're talking about. They don't necessarily have to be part of that portfolio. It helps when they are, but ultimately having a baseline platform that gives you, or even just the kind of data that Sandy would need to you know, to produce the reports and the information that he does. And of course, we're here to help with that. But I think when you get to that stage, you've got your baseline, you know, very much a solid base to then take everything forward, and hopefully, you know, that's where what we've talked about today. I think, you know, people, a lot of the people attending they'll be in that place where they've done the first step, or maybe thinking about doing the first step, and then, you know, the onwards kind of I guess that, as I say, that sort of future strategy piece is what comes next. And so, yeah, kind of nicely then onto this slide here. So what we'd like to offer for those attending today is a complimentary analyse and assess workshops, a few hours of our time, but hopefully we can support and help you understand that I guess the benefit of looking at that data and the benefit of what you might get from making some decisions around it, and ultimately, you know, working further with Fournet perhaps. But this is, you know, completely free, a bit of our time, bit of your time, obviously, but no real prep from any of the customers wishing to take us up on this. But please do drop us a note in the chat, get in touch with myself. My contact details will be at the end, or indeed Tony Curlis at the Vale. But yeah, we're more than happy to provide that assessment for those joining us today. So on that note, we are pretty much ready to close, unless there is anything in the chat, Caroline. I can't see.
I can't see anything, no.
No hands up or anything
Just
like
check the
that.
Q&A as well. No, I don't see any questions. That's good. That either means that we've answered any questions anybody might have had.
Indeed. Well, I mean, you can go back over the recording at your leisure. And right. So thanks, everybody. Oh, here we go, Debbie. Oh, there. Thank you very much, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
So yeah, just coming to a close then. Thank you to everybody who joined and taking the time. We hope you did get some value from what we've been talking about. But as I say, I think you know, we're happy to spend a few more hours sort of expanding, I guess, on the detail of how we do what we do, and you know, see just to see, as I say, if there's some sort of kind of value in some future engagements, or even just to give you a bit more guidance and direction. But I keep coming back to that data. It didn't really. I'm going back a few years now, but that sort of data analytics, I don't know, it didn't really kind of register with me. But since I've been working with the team, all of a sudden it's kind of hit home exactly what the value is in there if you know what you're looking for. So yeah, I think the data is key, getting that information out of all the different systems that you have, but then making it and presenting it in such a way that helps you with those kind of business cases, and ultimately can help fund projects by, you know, saving money in one place, fund a project in another place. And I think that's you know, from a public sector standpoint, that's certainly a challenge that you're facing now in terms of where those funds are available from, and then, you know, and they are limited. So on that note, I think we've pretty much wrapped up now. So if you want to learn anything more about Connecting Wales, Fournet's other services, or indeed talk more about those workshops, then please do get in touch, drop me a note. But otherwise, have a fantastic rest of the day and indeed week. Thank you for joining.